Okay, so you want to own a franchise, a proven brand, a system that works, a business in a box. You pay a fee, you follow the manual, and you own a piece of something famous. Here's the part that reorganizes everything. The most successful burger franchisor on earth does not primarily make its money selling you the right to sell burgers. It makes it by owning the building you sell them in and renting it to you. You are not their partner. You are their tenant. And you are also, simultaneously, the person doing the work and the person who put up the money. You paid in advance for the privilege of all three. Now, I've just given away the punchline, so let's do the thing that actually matters, which is understanding exactly how that works, because the mechanism is far stranger and far more elegant than the sentence suggests. And to see it, we have to start with what you pay, because a franchise is not one payment. It's a stack of them, and each one is doing a different job. The first is the franchise fee. This is the entry ticket, paid up front, simply for the right to be considered part of the system. It buys you the license, the training, the manuals, and the permission to put that sign above your door. It is not small, and it is gone the moment you pay it. And it is worth being clear that the franchise fee is the smallest number you will encounter. It's the headline figure, the one in the brochure, and it is nowhere near the real cost of getting open, because the actual cost is the build, the construction or fit out of the store to the franchisor's exact specification using their approved contractors, their approved layout, their approved equipment, the kitchen, the signage, the counters, the drive-through, the deposit on the lease, the initial inventory, the staff you have to hire and train before a single customer arrives, and working capital, because the store will lose money for a while before it doesn't, and you must be able to fund that. Stack all of that up, and the total investment for a serious food franchise runs into a genuinely large sum, and for the biggest brands, it can be well into 7 figures. That is a house, often several, and it must be found before you have sold a single thing, which is why the franchisor will want to know exactly how much money you have before they will even talk to you seriously. They are not being rude. They have watched undercapitalized franchisees fail, and a failed store with their name on it is a wound to their brand. And in many countries, there is a document that lays all of this out. A disclosure document the franchisor is legally required to give you before you sign. It contains the fees, the obligations, the litigation history, and often the numbers on how many units opened, closed, and were terminated in recent years. Read it, all of it. Because that last table, the one showing how many franchisees quietly left the system last year, is the most honest thing you will ever be handed in this transaction. And a great many people never turn to that page. The second is the royalty. And here is the detail that catches people. And it is genuinely important. The royalty is a percentage of your gross revenue, not your profit, your revenue. Sit with what that means. It means that in a month where your sales were fine but your costs ran high, and you personally made nothing, you still pay it. In a month where you lost money, you still pay it. The franchisor's income is calculated on the top line of your business before you have paid for a single thing. Your rent, your staff, your food, your electricity, your loan, all of that comes out of what's left after they have taken theirs, which is a very comfortable position to occupy, and a rather less comfortable one to be on the other end of. The third is the marketing levy, another percentage, again of revenue, paid into a national advertising fund. And in fairness, that fund does real work. It buys the television campaigns and the sponsorships that make the brand famous, which is precisely the thing you're paying for. But notice who it makes famous. It builds the brand, which is the franchisor's asset, using money collected from you in proportion to how hard you work. The fourth is the supply chain. In most systems, you are required to buy your equipment, your ingredients, and your packaging from approved suppliers at prices you did not negotiate and often cannot see behind. Sometimes those prices are genuinely good because the system's buying power is enormous and you get the benefit of it. And sometimes the franchisor has an arrangement with those suppliers and there is a margin in that chain that flows somewhere other than to you. And the fifth is the one that arrives when you least want it, the mandatory refresh. Every so often, the franchisor decides the brand needs to look current. New fit out, new signage, new equipment, new colors, new counters, new screens. And they can require you to do it at your expense, on their schedule. And you have to understand why they can, because the logic is airtight and it tells you everything. The appearance of that store is not your asset, it's theirs. A tired-looking outlet damages the brand in every customer's mind, and the brand belongs to them, so protecting it is not negotiable. You are, in effect, the custodian of somebody else's property, and you are paying for its upkeep out of your own pocket because you agreed to. So before we've even got to the rent, look at what's already happening. You paid to get in. You pay a percentage of everything you sell, whether or not you make anything. You pay for the advertising that builds their brand. You buy through their supply chain. And you renovate their storefront when they say so. Now let's talk about the rent, because this is where it becomes genuinely beautiful in the way a very well-designed machine is beautiful. Here's the trick, and it is one of the great structural insights in the history of business. In many of the largest franchise systems, the franchisor does not simply approve your location. They take the location themselves. They buy the site outright, or they sign the head lease with the property owner. And then they sublease it to you. Which means the company whose sign is above your door is also your landlord. And now count their income streams, because there are two, and they behave completely differently. The first is the royalty. It rises and falls with your sales. It's a share of your success, and it is genuinely exposed to how well you do. The second is the rent, and the rent does not care. The rent is a fixed obligation, agreed in a lease, due every single month, regardless of whether you had a brilliant year or a catastrophic one. It arrives in a recession. It arrives when a competitor opens across the road. It arrives when you are lying awake, wondering how to make payroll. And here is the part that should genuinely reframe how you see every chain store you have ever walked past. That rent is frequently charged to you at a markup over what the franchisor is paying the actual property owner. So the franchisor is not simply passing on a cost. They are running a property business on a spread, and you are the tenant paying it. So the honest description of the largest and most famous franchisors is not that they are restaurant companies. They are real estate companies with an extremely effective training department and a network of highly motivated operators who have paid, personally, for the right to generate rent for them. Read that again because it's the whole episode. The burger is not the product. The burger is what makes the property valuable. And once you see it, you understand why this model conquered so much of the world's retail landscape, because look at what it does to risk. A conventional company that wants 1,000 restaurants has to find 1,000 sites, build 1,000 kitchens, hire 10,000 people, and manage all of it. Every one of those stores is a place where its own money can be lost. And every one of those managers is an employee who will go home at 6 whether the store is thriving or not. The franchisor does none of that. The franchisee raises the money. The franchisee signs the personal guarantee. The franchisee hires the staff, works the hours, absorbs the losses in a bad year, and gets up at 5 in the morning because it is their money, their name on the loan, and their family depending on it. And the franchisor collects a percentage of the revenue and the rent from all of it. That is the real genius of the structure. It is not merely a way to grow quickly. It is a way to grow quickly using somebody else's capital, somebody else's labor, and somebody else's risk, while retaining the only two things that actually appreciate: the brand and the land. And now, with that understood, everything else in the relationship starts making sense, including the thing that surprises franchisees most painfully, which is that your interests and your franchisors are not aligned. They overlap, but they are not the same, and they come apart at a very specific moment. They come apart precisely when you start doing well. Here's the mechanism. What does a franchisor want more of? Units. Every new store in the system is a new franchise fee, a new royalty stream, and very often a new lease. Growth in unit count is, more or less, the entire engine of their business. Now imagine your store is thriving. There are queues. The catchment is clearly strong, and the franchisor looks at that data and reaches an obvious conclusion. This area can support more. So they open another one, 2 miles away. For them, this is straightforwardly good. 2 stores generate more total revenue than 1, So the royalties go up, and there's another lease on the books. Even if each individual store does somewhat less business than yours was doing alone, the system as a whole earns more. For you, this may be a catastrophe, because a meaningful portion of your customers now find the new store more convenient, and your sales fall, and your costs do not. Your rent is unchanged. Your staff are unchanged. Your loan is unchanged. You are simply doing less business through the same fixed cost base, which is the fastest way there is to turn a profitable store into an unprofitable one. This is called encroachment, and it is the single most bitter source of conflict in this entire industry. And the only thing standing between you and it is the territory clause in your agreement, which may grant you genuine exclusivity in a defined area, or which may grant you something much weaker, a right of first refusal, or a protected radius so small it protects nothing or nothing at all. And that clause was drafted by the franchisor's lawyers in the franchisor's interest and handed to you as part of a standard agreement that you may have very little power to change. So read it and understand that this one paragraph may matter more than every other page in the document combined. All right, that's a lot of bad news. And now I want to be genuinely fair because there is a real thing being purchased here, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. So let's ask the proper question. What do you actually get? The first thing is a system, and the value of it is easy to underestimate until you've tried to build one. An independent restaurant owner has to make 10,000 decisions. What's on the menu? How much to charge? Where to buy the beef? How the kitchen is laid out? How long the fries cook? What the training program is? How to handle a complaint? What the shifts look like? Every one of those is a chance to be wrong. And independent operators are wrong constantly, and that is a large part of why so many of them fail. A franchisee inherits the answers. Not opinions, answers. Tested across thousands of outlets, refined over decades, written down. That is not nothing. That is possibly the most valuable operating manual you could ever be handed. And it took somebody else's money and somebody else's failures to write it. The second thing is demand on day one. An independent opens its doors, and nobody knows it exists. A franchise opens its doors, and there is already a queue because the sign above it is one people have trusted since they were children. You did not build that trust. You rented it, but it is real, and it is standing outside your door on your first morning. The third is buying power. You are purchasing your supplies as part of a system that buys at a scale no independent could ever approach, and while the franchisor may take a margin in that chain, the underlying prices are frequently far better than anything you could negotiate alone. And the fourth is the one almost nobody talks about, and for a great many people, it is the actual reason this entire industry exists. Financing. Walk into a bank and say you would like to borrow a large sum to open a restaurant of your own design. You will find them, at best, unenthusiastic, because the bank knows exactly what happens to most new independent restaurants, and it is not a story with a happy ending. Now walk in and say you would like to borrow the same amount to open a unit of a major, established franchise system. The conversation is completely different. Because the bank has financed hundreds of these, it has data. It knows what a unit of that system typically earns, what it typically costs, and how many of them survive. The risk is not unknown. It is measured. So the loan gets approved, which means that for an enormous number of people, the franchise is not simply a business opportunity. It is the only door into business ownership that will actually open. You are not just buying a brand and a manual. You are buying a track record you did not earn, which a lender will accept as collateral for a life you could not otherwise have financed. That is genuinely valuable. And anybody who sneers at franchising without acknowledging it has not understood who it's for. And there's a fifth thing, which is smaller but which matters more than people expect. Within the system, you are not powerless, because operating quality is genuinely yours. Two franchisees of the same brand, in similar towns, with identical menus, identical prices, identical suppliers, and identical signage, can produce wildly different results. One store is clean, fast, well-staffed, and the manager knows the regulars. The other has a queue that never moves, a bathroom nobody has checked since Tuesday, and a rotating cast of miserable teenagers. Same brand, same system, Same everything the franchisor provided. Completely different business, which tells you where your leverage actually is. You cannot control the royalty. You cannot control the brand, the supply chain, the refresh schedule, or whether they open a store 2 miles away. All of that was decided by somebody else in a document before you arrived. What you control is the execution. And in a system where every unit has been handed an identical set of tools, execution is the only variable left, which means it is worth a great deal more here than it would be almost anywhere else. The franchisor gave you the machine. Whether it runs well is still entirely on you. So it's a real trade. Now let's look at what you're trading away, because the trapdoor here is not a risk. It's a certainty, and it's waiting at the end. Ask the question that every franchisee eventually asks, usually late at night, sometime around year 15. What do I actually own? You have worked for 2 decades. You opened at 5 in the morning. You made payroll through a recession. You know your regulars by name. The store is genuinely excellent, and it is excellent because of you. Now the term of your agreement approaches its end, and you look around and you count what is yours. The brand? No, that was always theirs, and every dollar of the marketing levy you paid made it more theirs. The system, the recipes, the operating manual? No, licensed to you for a period now expiring. The customers? This one hurts, because you think you know the answer, and you don't. They came for the sign. Most of them would not follow you across the street if you took the sign down, because they were never your customers. They were the brand's customers, and you were simply the person who happened to be serving them. And the building? If the franchisor holds the head lease, then no, not that either. The room in which you spent 20 years of your life is theirs, and when your agreement ends, they can put somebody else in it. So what do you own at the end, after all of that? A pile of used equipment, a trained team, and whatever you managed to save. And there is one more thing, and it is the quietest cruelty in the arrangement. Suppose you want out early. You can sell your franchise, and people do, and sometimes for good money, but you cannot sell it to whoever you like. The franchisor must approve your buyer. They will vet them, and they will take a transfer fee, and they may simply say no, which means the asset you spent your life building can only be sold to a person the other party consents to. You bought a job at a very high price, and you cannot even freely choose who to hand it to. And there is one detail I have left until now, deliberately, because it is the sharpest edge in the entire agreement, and most people sign it without pausing. The personal guarantee. When you borrow the money to build that store, and when you sign that lease, you will very likely be asked to guarantee it personally, which means the debt is not merely the business's debt, it is yours, your house, your savings, your everything, standing behind it. Now put that next to everything we have just described. You do not own the brand. You do not own the system. You may not own the room. Your customers came for the sign. Your franchisor can put a competitor 2 miles away, require you to renovate, and refuse to let you sell. And yet, if it all goes wrong, the person the bank comes to is you. That is the true shape of the arrangement, and it is worth stating plainly. The upside is shared. The downside is not. It sits, in its entirety, on the one person in the transaction who is also making the burgers. So let's answer the question we started with. What do you actually own when you own a franchise? You own a license. That's the honest word for it. An expensive, time-limited license to operate somebody else's business, using their name, by their rules, in a room you rent from them, while paying them a share of everything you sell, whether or not you made a penny. And here is the honest turn, and I mean it. That may still be a very good deal, because the alternative, for most people, is not a glorious independent business that they own outright. The alternative is no business at all, because the bank said no, and because building a system from nothing is a thing most people fail at, expensively. The franchise is not a scam. It is a trade. You are exchanging ownership, autonomy, and a very large share of the upside, in return for a proven system, a trusted name, and a door that actually opens. Whether that is a good trade depends entirely on whether you understood, on the day you signed, exactly which of those things you were giving up. So, should you buy one? Here's the honest split. The optimistic version goes like this. You pick a system with genuinely strong unit economics, and you check them yourself with a lawyer and an accountant who have read a franchise agreement before. You negotiate the territory clause, or you walk. You go in knowing that the royalty comes off the top, and you build a cost structure that can survive that. You run the store brilliantly, because operating well is the one variable that is entirely yours. You take the system's brand, its supply chain, and its financing, and you use all three to build something you could not have built alone. And you understand from day one that you are renting a name in a room, and you price your whole life accordingly. Done that way, it is a genuinely honorable path into business, and it has made a great many people comfortable. The harder version looks like this. You signed the standard agreement without changing a word of it, because you were excited and they were reassuring. Your territory turned out to be worth nothing, and they opened a second store 2 miles away in year 6. The royalty and the levy come off the top every month, including the ones where you take nothing home. The refresh arrived at the worst possible moment and cost you a fortune. And after 20 years of 5 o'clock mornings, the term ended, and you discovered that the customers were never yours, and neither was the room. And notice what decides between those two futures. Almost none of it is how good you are at running the store. Because in the end, a franchise doesn't sell you a business. It sells you permission to run one, and it charges you rent for the room you run it in.